Hey you! You're watching a clip from the DynamiteGizmo podcast. This is not the full episode, but if you want to see the full episode, make sure to click the link in the description. And remember, like, comment, subscribe. Do it now! Here's the clip. Okay? We're going to talk about Diego Lopes and Jean Silva, because they're fighting this weekend. Diego Lopes was one of my predicted champs at the beginning of this year. He was my curveball pick. And I made that call without even knowing that Ilia Topuria was going to vacate the featherweight title and move up to lightweight. And look what happened. Diego gets matched up against Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 314 for the vacant featherweight strap. He didn't get the win, but he obviously showed up and gave us a great performance. And to this day, UFC 314 is still one of my favorite cards of this year. For so many reasons. I've already gone on enough about it, so I'm not going to go into it again. But you know who else was on that card? Jean Silva. That was his first fight of 2025 and the first of the fighting nerds to step into the octagon this year. He faced Bryce Mitchell. Or did Rufy go before him? Did Rufy go first? Rufy went first, didn't he? Or did Rufy go after him? I can't remember. But on UFC 314, Jean Silva faced Bryce Mitchell and submitted him with a ninja choke. Now here's what made it wild, okay? The UFC 314 press conference came out of nowhere. It was announced the same week as UFC 313. And just days before that, Bryce Mitchell had dropped the very first episode of his podcast, Arc Insanity, where he made some comments about Adolf Hitler that Dana White and pretty much the entire world condemned and disagreed with. And at that point, Bryce was getting absolutely buried by fans and media and even Dana White like crazy. So Dana being Dana, he throws Bryce Mitchell last minute into UFC 314 against Jean Silva. And his reasoning was simple. The beauty of UFC is that if you hate someone, no matter how strong they are, there's always an opportunity for someone else to get in there and beat the shit out of them. And that's what the fans wanted. And at that point, the four main fighting nerds in the UFC were still collectively undefeated, and Jean Silva was starting to become a household name. That press conference, though, turned out to be a huge turning point, especially for Jean. Because right then, Bryce Mitchell was still the main focus of MMA headlines. Everyone was talking about his podcast comments. And the second he tried to grab the mic, the entire crowd erupted with the loudest boos you've ever heard in your entire stinky life. But Bryce stayed stone-faced, didn't stumble once on his answers, and stuck to his word. Then came Jean Silva's moment. His first UFC press conference, and he took full advantage. He shows up with a globe, mocking Bryce's flat earth beliefs. He's barking like a dog, pacing back and forth, trying to rattle Bryce, and then Bryce drops one of the coldest, most badass lines we've ever heard in a presser. Talking about putting dogs down and how they're always the last to squeal, some shit like that. Look it up if you haven't seen it. Jean barked right in Bryce's face at the stare down, and Bryce didn't even flinch. It was beautiful chaos, and a reminder of how electric a press conference can be. But that wasn't all, because Diego Lopes was also in the spotlight. While he was gearing up for Volk, Yair Rodríguez was making his... Patricio Pitbull was making his debut against Yair Rodríguez on that same card. And at that presser, Diego and Yair got into a heated argument in Spanish. And Fabiano, who was the translator for the UFC, was trying to translate on the fly, but he couldn't keep up. And later we found out what it was about. Yair accused Diego of his team attacking his friend Marco Beltran. He said, "Didn't you jump Marco with your team? I've been waiting to tell you this to your face. You're going to pay for Marco." And Diego fired back with, "Talk about my team again, and the same thing that happened to him will happen to you. You threatened a girl, and you're going to pay." But the thing that set it off at first was the colon. Colon? I think that means pussy. It's just like when Conor McGregor looked out the window of his car and called Jose Aldo a pussy. Italio, or whatever it was. He's like, you know what that means? Pussy. Some fans thought he was talking about Alexa Grasso when he said you threatened a girl, since she is a teammate at Lobo Gym, but there's no real evidence it was her. That heated exchange immediately had people speculating maybe Yair and Diego would end up fighting next at UFC Noche. But then the UFC Noche was announced for Guadalajara, Mexico at UFC 320 originally. But with the construction delays at the arena, the card got moved to San Antonio, where it's at now, and downgraded to a fight night rather than a main number event. Still, when it was first booked for Mexico, rumors were flying around that Yair might fight Volk for the title in the main event, which never made sense. Movsar should have been next. But since it was in Mexico, Yair was the guy that they wanted because of Noche. But when that fell through, speculation turned back to Diego versus Yair. Both Mexican, well, almost. Well, Diego's, he's Brazilian, but he classifies himself as Mexican. Both with a history of hating each other. It would have been the perfect main event for Noche. But that didn't happen either. And at no point did anyone think Diego versus Jean Silva was going to headline Noche UFC. Not at 314, not at any point. Until the actual announcement, no one thought that. And yet here we are. And it is a great matchup, don't get me wrong, but definitely an unexpected one. The Fighting Nerds as a group are really being pushed into... I got the hiccups. Someone called the cops. Are really being pushed into stardom. But this year's been rough for the Fighting Nerds. Jean Silva beat Bryce. Carlos Prates lost to Ian Gary. Then beat Jeff Neal. Mauricio Ruffy beat Bobby Green, then lost to Benoit Saint-Denis. And Kyle Baralho lost to Nasruddin Imavov. That's 3 of the 4 taking their first UFC losses this year. Now we've come full circle. Jean started the year for the Fighting Nerds with a win, I think. It might have been Ruffy, I can't remember. I think it might have been Ruffy. Anyway, he won't close the year. That'll be Carlos in November, unless something else happens. Maybe another Fighting Nerd will step up before the end of the year. Who knows? But Carlos is in November fighting Leon Edwards. But Jean has a big chance here. If he beats Diego Lopes, he might be just one more fight away from a title shot. That's how fast his rise has been. It's hard to bet against the Fighting Nerds, but as we saw this year, especially this past weekend, anything can happen. When you're on a hot streak with the hype pushing you forward, one loss can flip the narrative in an instant. That's the fight game, my friend. It doesn't just mean they're frauds. Losses happen. That's MMA. Not everyone is John Jones. But still, you just always hope, like, come on, I just win, please. But they'll bounce back, and they'll be stronger than ever, my friend. It's still the beginning of the Fighting Nerds. They're just getting started. And I mean, Carlos is already talking about retiring already, which is crazy, but that's a whole nother subject. So let me throw some questions down your filthy trousers so you can answer them. Do you think Jean Silva has what it takes to beat Diego Lopes this weekend? And after the back-to-back losses for Ruffy and Baralho, has your confidence in the Fighting Nerds shifted at all? Do you think it affects Jean's mindset going into this fight? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know in the comments below.